Greetings. In this Future Trends Forum recording, we explore the question of how academia and academics can do anti-racist work in the current political environment. Our guest is Terry Givens, a repeat guest, a beloved guest in the forum, talking about her new book, On the Reckoning, where she brings in her previous work on empathy in order to help us think about how best to do this kind of work, starting with ourselves. I hope you find this useful and enjoy. Please feel free to use the comment box to share your thoughts. Well, welcome everybody to the Future Trends Forum. I'm really glad to see you all here today. We have a return guest who is a favorite, who is brilliant, and she's talking about one of the most important topics of our era. Terry is someone that has been a guest on our program several times, and she has spoken movingly and thoughtfully from her really extensive experience of, among other things, teaching and administering about race and higher education, grappling with racism, how to do anti-racist work, and being who she is and how she conducts her work has always been rich and exciting. And thinking about racism and anti-racism has been a theme for the forum now for coming up on 6 years pretty steadily. So we'd like to connect with that. But also, this is right now late 2025. Doing this kind of work, if we think about it as DEI work, if we think about it as anti-racism, if we think about it as belonging, if we think about it as affirmative action, if we think about it as trying to make higher education reflect the demographic reality of the United States, how we do this has become more and more challenging based on the shift in politics and culture. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring Terry back. I mean, I want to have her on my show every day. But today I wanted to help us think about how to do this kind of work when it's even more challenging, even more difficult. So first, let me just say, Terry, hello and welcome. Where are you today?
I am currently in Menlo Park, California, even though I just got back from Vancouver, British Columbia. I split my time between there and here.
I see. Good, good. Well, this is probably a nicer climate to be in Menlo Park right now.
Well, actually, the weather's about the same. I'm jealous
What?
of Redondo Beach because I used to live in Redondo Beach many years ago when I was a grad student, and no, and we're in the 40s.
40s. Oh my gosh. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. That's hard. I had to give a talk at Vancouver at University of British Columbia once. Did I tell you this story?
I
I
don't
had,
think so.
they said, but give your talk. You're not going to be able to use PowerPoint, and when you get here, you'll see why. And I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. All right, so I had my whole talk ready to go, no slides. I get there, and I can't remember the name of the building, but the big hall had windows that were easily 120 feet tall and
Hmm.
30 feet wide, and it just poured in so much sunlight. It was an extraordinary space, and of course no projector could compete with that. But you needed that light in Vancouver. um, well, you know the drill. On the forum we ask people to talk about what they're doing next, and so I'm curious, what does 2026 look like for you? What are the big projects and the big themes for you?
Well, I would say, so those who don't know, I bopped around all over the place. I started out my career at University of Washington in Seattle, and then was at University of Texas at Austin for many years. And then I went on to be a provost. And so throughout that time, my work was related to immigration and race in Europe. And slowly but surely, I've been shifting that work to be more globally oriented and not just looking at Europe. So I've been to South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. I was just in the UK, which is sort of Europe, but really thinking about history and really trying to dig into things like the funny thing about living in Canada is settler colonialism just comes much more to the forefront. People think about it a lot more and talk about it more
Yeah.
openly and indigeneity and so on. And so I'm really trying to, kind of tie together the issues of immigration and race in a more concrete way from a research perspective. But also, as you know, I'm not just a researcher. I do a lot of work around these issues just in the university and beyond. And so my new book, Reckoning, is out now. And, one of the things I'm really trying to focus in on, which is critical, as you know, is how do we create change, especially in this environment? And so, my main point is that change is a constant, even when under duress. In fact, when we're under duress, change is even more important, doing that work towards change.
In fact, we could say, what's Octavia Butler's line? God is change.
Yes, indeed.
Uh,
Octavia
well,
Butler.
this book is the immediate, approximate reason for bringing you back, because this book is really, really powerful, very, very exciting, very accessible.
Hmm.
It has a whole stack of personal stories, but at the same time, we get a framing of racism and anti-racism at the global stage. So there's a really terrific chapter about NGOs and thinking through this in different countries. So harkening back to your earlier experience and your current work, as well as a deep dive into uh, personal experience and your recommendations for doing this. So if you haven't had a chance to yet, I strongly recommend the book. I'll if someone can toss a link from University of Bristol Press, please feel free, or I'll grab that myself. But I was really struck by just how much experience and how much reflection, how much work went into this extremely digested, very, very accessible work. Um, you recommend a whole series of ways that we can take action. But I want to start really quickly. And friends, I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, but then I want to get out of the way and leave it up to you for your questions. So please think about what you'd like to put to our guest. You begin with there's a sequence of 6 steps, and the
Hmm.
first 2 or 3 are about internal processes, about reflecting on one of them is being vulnerable yourself. Another
Yes.
one is reflecting on your own biases and thinking about shoot, I don't want to get the Audre Lorde quote wrong, but thinking about how to internally cast yourself to do the best kind of work that you can do. Um, how am I doing so far?
You're doing good.
Okay.
I would just add that I mean, the reason I started that way is because I realized I have to deal with my own bias, right? And so my first book, Radical Empathy, for those who don't know about it as well, that really does a deep dive into my own personal challenges around bias and so on. And I would say that I guess that's what I'm saying. Change starts with yourself. So, if and it's not that you're a bad person or anything, it's just that we all have to understand that we live in these broader structures that create bias. And so we internalize it. And so the internalization process means we have to look inside and understand how we have basically taken on all of those structures and perpetuate them.
So that's a key step, which is one which requires a lot of work, a lot of care, and a lot of, well, I'm trying to think.
Well, it's vulnerability, right? That's why that's the first step. And vulnerability is really hard, especially with it's so funny because when I do these discussions, often people are like, well, I can't be vulnerable around other people or my boss or whatever. Of course not. But the important thing is to be vulnerable with yourself
Hmm,
because it's,
hmm.
and being willing to take that look and say, okay, change starts with me because if we can't do that internal work, and not everybody can, but that internal work is so important. And it was so important for me to understand how I mean, I had so many blind spots. And I discover more every day.
How can we, to return to the theme that I opened with, how can we do that kind of vulnerability, if you will,
Mhm.
in 2025 when we are facing so many extra challenges? I mean, it depends on who you are, but if you are, undocumented or just Latino in general, now you're under extra threat. If you are subject to economic fragility, that's even more intense. I mean, it seems that every month we get some extra challenge to us all, which gives us the very human response of wanting to be defensive, of wanting to armor up, wanting to protect yourself. But to be vulnerable seems even more risky, even more dangerous right now. How do
Well,
we do it?
yeah, you have to be careful about it, obviously. I mean, you don't want to be vulnerable in front of somebody who's out to harm you. But it's like I said, it's more about internal, but also for there, those of us who are dealing with, you know, more overt racism, misogyny, all these different things. What I've really been talking about a lot, and it comes out in the book, is this idea of mutual aid. And so it's a situation where we need to, yes, I am dealing with lots of things that are not great, and there's others who are dealing with really hor I mean, I can't, I'm a political scientist, so I can't help but
Yeah, as
watch
well.
the news. I can't turn it off and say I'm just going to ignore it. And so part of it is being able to create some space so that you don't get, because part of the problem right now is they want to overwhelm us with all the things that are going on. And so to avoid that, you have to be willing to kind of create structures around yourself that allow, so I have to be able to not only, parse the news, but I'm asked to be on the news all the time. I just did an interview yesterday. I have to be able to talk coherently about it. And also in a way that people can understand, I try to be very clear as I am now. I try to be very clear and concise. In my book, I'm trying not to use a lot of terminology that people don't understand. Obviously I'm an academic. I could throw out a lot of terms, but the idea is to make it clear. And so for those of people who are suffering right now, like I said, the critical thing is mutual aid. We have to be out there to help each other. And because we are facing a divide and conquer scenario, where people are, well, it's the, there's so many different ways to talk about it, but it's the situation where, well, I'm not being impacted, so why do I have to do anything? And it's
Mm,
that
mm,
I talk
mm.
about this, and this chapter 2 is all about, how do we create change? And part of the problem is this bystander syndrome,
Mhm,
where
mhm.
you're on the bus, and somebody is haranguing somebody else and nobody does anything, so you just step back and say, oh, I'm not gonna be the one. But then if somebody does step in, or even two people step in, then everybody's all of a sudden paying attention, and might take action, right? So we have to think in those terms that if we just sit back, and you can't do everything, right? Again, it's the overwhelm. So you have to pick, and like each chapter, both of this book and my radical empathy book, have things you can do. So the way to get past the overwhelm and the constant barrage is to do something, however small. When we saw that the SNAP benefits were going to be cut off, I started making monthly donations to my local food bank.
Mm, mm, mm.
I mean, for me, I write books, I do a lot. I develop programs, all kinds of things. And that, it's not for everybody. But the critical thing is to take some action, no matter how small.
Like that. Thank you. Thank you. Your previous book, which we hosted you to talk about, was Radical Empathy. And I'm saying this, I just realized, let me check. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so my laptop has this fun thing that when I fire up Zoom, it cranks my microphone down to about 20%. And I like to think it's being sarcastic. And it just occurred to me that I might have been very quiet. I want to make sure that my audio here is on. Um, your book is about radical empathy, which I thought was so brave
Hmm.
at a time when people were not being empathetic. And it seems in 2025 we are even less empathetic right now. I mean, how can it seems so difficult to try to take other people seriously, to listen to their lives, to really accept them for who they are, to take them seriously when we have, algorithms which reject that, which reward us for being hateful, when we have politics which are all about fury and denunciation. I mean, I routinely get chastised by people for talking to people who I don't agree with. How can we do radical empathy now? I mean, you are the expert on this. How can we keep being empathy radicals in
Well,
2025?
I think people have the wrong idea about empathy, and as
Please.
somebody noted in the chat, it's been politicized, and certain people are saying, "Oh, empathy is bad," because you don't want.
True.
But it's not that you take on other people. So a good friend of mine, in every talk I do now, practically I start with this: is empathy is not absolution. Empathy does not mean you take on somebody else's positions. Empathy means, the funny thing is. And empathy is a strategy. And people, if you watch really smart people in business and so on, they are using empathy because they're trying to figure out, how do I get into the head of my customer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even the algorithms are using empathy because they're trying to figure out what makes this person tick. What ads are they going to respond to? So, even AI, it is being designed to use empathy in a sense because it's trying to put itself in our shoes and say, what is going to get this person to buy my product, or what is going to get this person to use my social media, network, whatever it is. People don't understand that empathy is a strategy. And it's a way to, even for understanding somebody who you may consider your enemy, if you can get into their shoes and understand what they're trying to do, and what they're feeling, then you have a better way of. It's so funny because I was having a discussion with somebody about how why I've often been picked to do have leadership positions. I mean, very early in my career, I was a vice provost. I started the Center for
Mm.
European Studies.
Mhm.
I was a provost, and I literally have to fight my dean right now to stay out of leadership. They would love for me to step in and be, an associate dean or whatever level. And I've resisted because I really want to be a teacher right now. But
Mm. Mm. Mm.
the reason for that is because I know how, in a sense, I know how to handle people. And the reason I know how to handle people is I do step into their shoes and say, it's not just about, I talk about doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not really it. It's do unto others as they would like to have done unto them, right? So you have to figure out, how do I persuade this person that what I'm want to do is the right thing? I got to figure out how they're thinking. And I can't do that if I'm sitting here with this big block in front of me saying, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to have any, I mean, there's, all these famous sayings about, know your enemy, even, right? And the best way to persuade somebody is to understand what is going to get them to want to do, you want to get somebody to do what, you want them to do. You have to understand them, right? You can't just, if you want to change somebody's mind, you can't just barrage them and say, without thinking about what is going to get them to respond.
Thank you. Thank you. That is a fantastic answer. And friends, if you haven't read Terry's books, you can see why I recommend them. Is because again, she is able to be this concise and this clear. There's a link to her book in the chat to The Reckoning there. Um, I have more questions, but I want to open the floor now for everybody else. Please, what would you like to ask Terry? Either about empathy or about listening, or about activism or vulnerability, or anything else about trying to do social justice work right now in the academy. Please just hit up the chat box, as some of you are completely not shy about that, which is great, or use the Q&A box. Catherine Trujillo, if you really need that, please feel free to. Um, while people are thinking, I'd like to ask one more question because I just found the book so fascinating and I kept pulling at it and I'm making notes about it. One is thinking about the international space and the NGO space. I mean, right now in the United States setting, it looks like a lot of businesses have turned against DEI or other forms of that in different ways. It looks like, of course, the national government is extensively and openly anti-DEI. Most recently, there was the that for me almost bizarre move where Trump ended free admission to national parks on Juneteenth and on Martin Luther King Day. but
Mhm.
gave a free day for his own birthday, which
Mhm.
it feels like something cartoonish.
Mhm.
Uh, but so if the federal government is out and if corporations aren't to be trusted right now on this score, where do we turn to in the nonprofit space, or in the NGO space? Is this a time where international nonprofits are really in a good position? I mean, who would you recommend that we work with? Who can be strong and reliable in this time?
There's so many organizations that are doing really amazing work. I mean, actually, I think it's important to start with your own local community, as Catherine mentions. I think that community connection is important, but at the international level, there's tons and tons. I mean, I don't know where to begin, but I just, send uh, money every month to the International Rescue Committee because they're doing so. If you remember, they also cut off a lot of foreign aid and work that was being done for refugees. And so I do give regularly to organizations that support refugees, like the International Rescue Committee. There's still lots of UN organizations that are doing really good work, and they also take donations. There's a variety of yeah, and it depends on what issue area you're interested in. There's lots of organizations that are doing healthcare, Médecins Sans Frontières, I like the French version, Doctors Without Borders. And I do speak French for those who are wondering. And there's like I said, I mean, if you're interested in trying to, really create that change in the nonprofit international sector, there are tools you can use to get ratings on which organizations are trustworthy and so on. And I would talk to friends, family, look at what around you who is connected to different organizations. And I guess that for me, I focus on things like healthcare, youth, refugees, the people who are being hurt, the most by the changes in the US right now are refugees, are young people in places like Asia, Africa, who are getting support for their AIDS treatments,
Mhm.
things like that. So I think that there are lots of organizations that are trying to fill those voids. But, another way that I think people, to kind of bring it back down to the local level is that people have to think about is, just local level politics, because that does have an impact at the international level. And if you can become more engaged and find out what's going on locally, then that can often lead to support for changes even at the international level.
That sounds a richness, a wide range of places we can work with. You mentioned in your book Solidarity Sundays as well.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing is the media is not covering the protests these days. I because I can see them happening, and so things like Solidarity Sundays, I think some of that has died down. I know my local organization hasn't been as active, although they were on October 18th when there was the nationwide, actually global protests. But I think that you have to kind of seek out what's going on in your local area. You know, have been working in British Columbia with the Democrats Abroad. There
Mm.
are other organizations that are uh, trying to make those connections so indivisible. It's actually sometimes easier just to go on social media and find the organizations. Like Kitty, I was wondering if your cat would join us. Hello. My cat is ignoring me right now.
That's
Um,
typical.
yes, yeah, that's the norm, except in the middle of the night. But anyway, back to so yeah, I think that people, and I guess what I'm really trying to do with reckoning is say, look, I've been very, lucky, blessed, whatever, to work at all different levels. From, I've worked with young people at the individual level. I've worked with organizations, universities, corporations. I've worked with national, level nonprofits. I've worked with international nonprofits. I've been to the UN. I've worked with organizations like the Brussels Forum and the German Marshall Fund. I mean, all of these things are uh, things that have tied in many ways to my research. And so I feel very lucky that my research has often led me to, working with organizations that are doing, things like developing leaders and so on.
Well, this is this is even more work, and I love the way that this gives us a kind of network of networks to think about. In the chat, Catherine Trujillo says she appreciates the emphasis on mutual aid. She thinks community organizing can be instrumental. I have to agree here. Especially looking forward to the next No Kings protest to see how large that gets. Also in the chat, Lizzie says that she's originally from South Africa. She's currently chair of a nonprofit that supports the economic development of women. Can you please share a bit about the work you did in South Africa? And she adds, the defunding of US aid in the US has negatively impacted sub-Saharan Africa, which is sadly true.
Yeah, I would say that my work in South Africa is in early stages. I did meet with some folks. This was just a year ago, while I was there, and I'm actually working on a research project that I'm hoping, oh, there's my cat, will get funded. Um, and that would have us working with University of Pretoria. So obviously the loss of funds from USAID has had a huge impact on different organizations and so on. And so I'm hoping eventually to develop a broader network of folks who are interested not only in the research side, but also how can we support these organizations going forward. And so I'm not as tied in yet to other parts of Africa, but I'm hoping to make those connections. And I'd be happy to talk with you, Lizzie, more about the work that you're doing in South Africa. And the obviously the economic development of women we know is something that helps all of society. And study after study shows that if you help women become economically successful and independent, then that improves the lives of their children and their families and so on. So I think the work that you're doing with women is critical and is it's kind of that mutual aid thing that needs to happen going forward. So it may be that we get groups of women here in the US who, are supporting, the work of women in other parts of the world who are suffering because of the loss of funds. But yeah, there's a couple more questions. I think we missed one, Brian, from Ben on
We have several, yeah.
yes.
Our New York State friend Ben Harwood asks, might empathy today be learning, excuse me, might empathy today be leaning towards pathos, transitioning from a stance of understanding to a mechanism for influencing emotional response?
I think that it's so I think the way our understanding of empathy it's evolving, I would say, because I think a lot of the literature I was reading as I prepped to write my book, Radical Empathy, was saying that a lot of people connect empathy to different emotions like and it just went out of my head because I'm old and things like that happen. Not consideration, but uh, compassion. So we have to think about, I had to think about what is compassion versus what is empathy. And empathy to me is a little, like I said, it's a bit more strategic. And, compassion is, okay, I feel for you. Empathy, that's why I call it radical empathy, because it's about taking action. So it's not necessarily a mechanism for influencing emotional response, because it's more a mechanism for allowing me to understand what kind of response might somebody have to what I am saying or doing. If that makes, I hope that makes sense.
Sorry, Ben, thank you for the great question. And Terry, thank you for that very clear and honest answer. Thank you. My friend Raj Devasagayam asks this. In your experience, first, what ways might openness and curiosity be met with defensiveness? And second, forthright honesty be scrutinized with a conformity correctness?
Yes, this is always the struggle, isn't it? Um, yeah, defensiveness is something that I run into a lot in a variety of fronts. And so I try to, my approach to that, like one of the things that I see happening a lot is people will be curious and, ask questions. But I say, before you ask a question, offer up something yourself. Because a lot of times it's like, who are you? Where are you from? It's like, no, don't start there. Start with, hi, I'm Terry. I'm from, Menlo Park, and I like to study political science. What do you like to do? That's a much different approach than just coming up to somebody and saying, oh, who are you? What do you do? It's like, whoa, I can see getting defensive there. If instead I come and say, here's who I am, and I'm just it makes more sense that I'm being curious if I'm willing to share something about me before I start asking you. And that tends to diffuse some of the defensiveness. And I often talk about this because I'm, as you can imagine, having been a provost and a vice provost and all these different, working with, being like the only woman or the only black woman in an environment, I often have to try to diffuse defensiveness. And so the way I typically do it is to, again, to share some of myself, to ask questions, it's unfortunate that we have to do that so much because it's like you feel like you're constantly um, trying to assuage people's fears and concerns, et cetera. But, it's just reality right now. It's just like, I was talking to somebody the other day and it's like, well, it's so frustrating that women and people of color have to do all this work up front. Why are they always the ones who have to do the work when we're the ones who are often dealing with things like discrimination and so on? And the reality is, especially, we're in the field of higher education, I find that, well, I'm a leader in higher ed, and it just happens that we're in an era when there aren't a lot of people like me around. And so I've just resigned
Mhm.
myself to the fact that I have to not that I have to, but that I want to do the work. I just have to be very careful not to overburden myself or, burn myself out. So yeah, I think that for as far as forthright honesty, we have, there's a difference. It's a very difficult to parse, but there's being, if you have empathy, sometimes it's a little easier to use honesty in a way that tries to avoid, getting to that defensiveness. Um, the whole, I can tell you, I've never been, uh, considered somebody who was conforming or doing things for correctness. I'm very
Mm.
straightforward.
Yeah.
So there's being straightforward, there's being honest, and there but doing it in a way that allows space. I think a lot of times we're straightforward and honest, and we just don't want any as people don't want a response. They just want to be able to give their opinion, and they don't aren't willing to receive what others. So it has to be a two-way street, right? If I'm going to be forthright and honest, then I have to be willing to hear back from others. And I try to model that, and it's something I have to do in the classroom because I'm teaching topics that are, very political. And I don't want my students to think I'm not willing to hear their ideas and perspectives. And, I feel like last semester, especially, I was pretty successful in making sure that the kids, because I have to say, it's the natural thing for kids who are maybe more left-leaning or pro-immigration to come to my classes, but there are
Mhm.
kids who have, I want to make sure the kids, sometimes I'll play devil's advocate in order to get them, because I want them to think, right? And so, being honest you know, there's truth and there's honesty, right? And when you're
Mhm,
being honest,
mhm,
you're giving your truth, and you
mhm,
have to understand
mhm.
that somebody else may have a different truth.
And then that's how we begin. Um, Raj, what a great pair of questions. And Terry, what a great answer. This is what I love about the forum, our ability to make these connections and to share these thoughts. Um, the Thank you. So I'm still resonating with that. I would love to just pause and think about that, but I'm not gonna. I gotta keep things going. And we only have 19 minutes to go, so I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. Catherine Trujillo mentions this. She worked collaboratively on establishing a rapid response network, an RRN, for San Luis Obispo County and Santa Barbara County. What she learned is that people want to take action, but were unsure how to make moves. We established online trainings on Know Your Rights during ICE actions on educational campuses that led to a pool of people who joined the RRN. And it's an intergenerational group. Catherine, that sounds fantastic. If you're up for it, if your microphone is on and you're in a place where you can speak out loud, would you like to say more? Would you like to add more about that?
Hi, everyone. I really appreciate Terry's sharing and helping us prompt how her words connect to our lived experiences and work that we're doing. It was interesting when I think about community organizing. I think about the network that I already have and established, but there's older generations and younger generations than me that navigate the world differently. And if you all have a shared purpose, maybe coming in at different ways, how do you bring those people together for a common cause? And, like I think someone mentioned, or Terry might have mentioned about protesting, that we're not seeing the protests that we did at the beginning. I think they're still out there. I think people are just motivated to take action and have something tangible so that we can intervene on what's happening historically and contemporarily in these moments. And so doing some trainings, I think was a low barrier way for people to learn about the topic, understand the issues, and then see themselves within that work. And that's where I think the Rapid Response Network was successful, that we were able to get a pool I think we have 1,800 people now that do different actions related to the network. So I think it's just bringing everyone together
Mhm.
and
How
giving
many
people
people?
options. 1,800. There's 1,800.
Whoa,
That's
whoa,
amazing.
whoa.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
and
fantastic.
that is a classic example of how if you bring people together and they see other people, it just creates a rolling effect of more and more people becoming involved. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm loving to see happening, across not only in the US, but the UK has been having a lot of protests around the government's actions on immigration. In Canada, they're seeing some crackdowns. Not nothing, nothing like what's happening in the US, but definitely impacting, some of my students and so on. So yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciate you sharing that very inspiring story with all the practical learnings that come from it. You all are doing good work. Good luck. Um, I'm glad to know you. We have another question that's come in. This is from MK Lampkin, and Jennifer D'Amico or D'Amizo supported it. She said, I've been part of this faculty staff anti-racist campus organization since 2020. We all seemed aligned through October 7th, 2023. From there, we've experienced division between those who support Palestinian liberation and those who perceive such actions as anti-Semitic. Do you have advice for those navigating Zionism/anti-Zionism within anti-racist organizations?
Yeah,
It's a
go
tricky
ahead.
question. It's a very
Yeah, so
tricky question.
this is one of the hardest issues I've dealt with, I can tell you. And it's so funny because I have friends. I guess what has impressed me is my friends who have, kind of said, this is, I'm gonna take this position and this is important to me and why, but that they're open to saying, I understand why you might have a different position. I've seen this play out on, social media amongst many of my friends in higher education, because of course, there've been this, it's not just anti-racist organizations that have been dealing with this. It's just within departments, I've seen people almost coming to blows over this issue. And when I was at McGill, for example, we had a encampment, but then there were times when there was where it was a I won't say they were students, but there were people who felt like going after the administration building and breaking windows and things was an important way to get attention, and some people felt that we should draw the line at actual violence, and others felt that it was important because of course it makes the news and gets the issue raised. And so I think this is going to be one that is I think the important thing is um, making clear what our positionality is on the issue. I mean, I think, I tell my friends that I am not anti-Semitic in any way, but I also see what is happening in Palestine, and it is something that is horrific, and I do call it a genocide. And so I I think that we have to, it's each situation is different, and even each relationship is different. And so I have some friends who I have to tread a little bit more lightly around the issue, and others who, are demanding that we all, and it's not just, the anti-Semitism issue. I have friends who are like, if you aren't out here, protesting and saying it's a genocide, then you're a problem. So there are issues on all sides of it. And, I wish, this is one that is just going to be a tough one. And if other people have thoughts on this, I would love to hear it, because I've just, for me personally, um, you know, I have tried to make clear, that I believe that obviously the October 7th attacks were horrific, but what happened after that was, you know, I mean, just devastation. So,
I appreciate you starting off with positionality on the score, and I appreciate you wrestling with um, a fundamentally very, very, very difficult question. MK and Jennifer, thank you for raising this. Um, and Jennifer adds the context before
of
October
course,
7th.
right.
Um, Friends, we're coming up in the last few minutes of our session, and we're wrestling with really hard topics. And I can't speak for myself, but I think Terry's handling these with grace, equanimity, and an awful lot of her trademark empathy. We have another question which has come up. This is from Chris Aldrich, who says he appreciates the chance to understand the truth of others, but at what point do we draw a harder line to handle what Karl Popper called the paradox of tolerance? And if you're new to the term, I put in a quick link to it, but basically it's how do you tolerate people who would not tolerate anybody else? That's too quick a summary, but please, Terry, you're the political scientist. Over to you.
Well, it's an interesting point, but I guess my take on it, obviously, we're in an era of selective truth, of disinformation, all these different things. And I think this is probably one of the harder topics to tackle, in the sense that how do you deal with somebody who, their objective truth is something that you just can't, obviously can't tolerate. And it's not like we haven't dealt with these issues throughout our history, and throughout time. So I guess my take on it is, the reason I focus on empathy is not to say that we should just agree with, as I've said before, it's more about understanding where people are coming from and uh not I mean people I know that there people want to just be sometimes hardline and say this is the way I am, period, end of story. I'm not gonna, change or try to understand anybody else. And, that's where, to me, the whole empathy is not absolution part comes in, but also that, radical empathy is not for everyone. And that we do have to be, I mean, selectivity is important in the sense that there are just going to be people who we cannot manage that we have to figure out ways to even avoid. And I have family members, people, I think people think because I'm the radical empathy person that I'm willing to be open to anyone. But no, I have one or two family members who I just don't interact with. Um, and because I know that I cannot tolerate the way that they are living and the way that they have there's toxicity in the world, and we can't ignore that toxicity. And so I am not going to put myself in a situation where I'm exposing myself on a regular basis to that toxicity. And now there are some instances where you have that in your workplace and you do have to learn how to manage it. And I have my strategies for managing that kind of toxicity when it's happening in a place where I can't escape it. Um, but yeah, I agree with Ben. That that you have to take it, that at an individual level sometimes and say, who is this person in front of me? Um,
Mm, mm.
and versus what are the broader issues that are, impacting, me personally as well as society. So, there, yeah, and I agree, Jennifer, that everyone has their own level of tolerance. And I probably have a much higher level of tolerance than many people because I, I try to give people a chance and I try not to give up hope. And a lot of it, what I try to do is um, give examples, or be an example, the way that I live and my books and so on. Um, and actually, I don't know. I think I've become less tolerant as I've gotten older, Brian.
Oh, no.
But anyway, Raj wants me to expand on strategies to counter unavoidable toxicity. Well, it's kind of personalized because for me, I have what I call my core, my steel core. And that's why I think the first couple of steps of radical empathy are so important, which are to, that vulnerability and being grounded in who you are is the way I put it. And if you are grounded in who you are, then I can, and this is something that has developed over time for me. I can be in toxic situations and even have people attacking me, but that does not impact who I am and my steel core. So I may be upset when somebody does something that bothers me, but that is not, you have to separate yourself from, the attacks, from the way people try to define you, right? And so because I've spent a lot of time working out who I am and who I want to be, which is I'm a constantly evolving person, um, that when that toxicity has come into play, and I talk about it in many situations in my books, is I turn that around and say, okay, this is not a positive for me, but I am still Terry Gibbons, right? And even if I don't handle the situation well, that does not change who I am. And so it's being able to hold on to that, you know, who I am that really helps me to deal with that toxicity.
Thank you. I love that steel core. Um, I mean, I think everyone should take that away from this session. Um, I'd like to exercise the moderator's privilege by asking a question on my part. which is we've been talking about nonprofits. We've been talking about organizations like Solidarity Sundays and Médecins Sans Frontières. We've also been talking about our individual psyches, ourselves, our biographies. But I'm wondering if you could give us some more advice, some more thoughts about academic institutions in this sense. I mean, I'm thinking about teaching and learning centers. I'm thinking about the institution of tenure. I'm thinking about libraries. I'm thinking about the way that campus architects are now trying to design spaces that are better suited for people who are not neurotypicals. I mean, what kind of, and there are a lot more. What kind of academic institutional supports should we be leaning on, and how can we best do this work specifically within the institutions of colleges and universities?
So, Brian, you and I have been having these conversations for a long time, and
Hmm.
my big concern right now is that institutions are retrenching on a lot of this, and
Hmm.
that there was a lot of momentum for this kind of focus on things like I was just lamenting the other day that even at a place like the University of British Columbia, our classrooms are not designed well for the kinds of things you I want to do in the classroom.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Shifting from, kind of a more round table discussion to, little smaller groups and things like that. I think that so the knowledge is out there. We know what we need to do to make classrooms, for example, better suited to, things like I was talking about. Like we always start, in my 20 student senior seminar talking in a group, but then I want them to break up into smaller groups because some people
Mhm.
won't
Mhm.
talk unless they're in a smaller group.
Yeah.
And but then the classroom, it's very, it's hard to
Yeah.
shift the
Yeah.
table, things like that. But also, just we have not done a good job of training faculty to understand how to deal with non-typical neurotypical students. And I hear this all the time, and frankly, I have a son who has ADHD and has struggled and so on, and we've had to give him strategies on how to work with his professors and a lot of times I think for faculty, we just think it's a bother. Oh God, I have to do accommodations again
Hmm.
instead of thinking, oh, this is a student who needs some extra support and how can I provide that and so on. And I guess I would say that I'm hoping that we can get back to, we're now I feel like we're just hanging on for survival. And um, but I do think that there's a lot that can be done to train faculty to understand um uh what they need to do to support all students and that you have we kind of just we create our syllabi, we go in, we lecture, whatever. And I know there's a lot of faculty who do more than that, but I think that I really try hard to create a space where students feel like they can let me know when they're having issues or if they know where to go when they're having issues. And I wish we could create classroom spaces that were, um, more suited to, active learning. I mean, gosh, I started learning about active learning methods back when I was, just starting out at University of Washington, and I love doing things like having, service learning and so on and giving and now I give students alternatives to taking. I try not to give just exams. I try to give students alternatives so that they can do something that's more in alignment with their skills and so on. So anyway, I just think we need to be more flexible in general.
Well, I wish I'd heard that advice years and years ago. Because I think I wish more in academia had known that advice because I think it's especially well suited and powerful for our time. Thank you. And and thank you for joining us for this hour. Terry, you've been fantastic. You've been humble, you've been elegant, you have been empathetic, of course. You've been so thoughtful. Thank you very, very much for sharing your time with us. What's the best way for people to catch up with you these days? Um, hey, what's I mean, are you a LinkedIn person,
Yes.
Instagram person?
I'm everywhere,
Every
but mainly LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on my website, terrygivens.com. You can email me. My UBC email is terry.givens@ubc.ca or terry@terrygivens.com. If you have a trouble, you can always, if you're on LinkedIn, just message me there. You just Google me and you'll find I'm on Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram and Facebook and all those different places. So, again, thank you everybody for coming. This was really, really, I mean, really insightful questions. And I really appreciate the tough ones, even, about Israel, Palestine. Those are things we just have to really focus in on, and hopefully we can learn. The tagline to my first book, Radical Empathy, was finding a path to bridging racial divides, but we need to learn how to bridge all kinds of divides,
Mm,
including those. So I hope that we can all work towards that and really try to get to that point where we're supporting each other regardless of any differences we might have.
it's a great thought. Thank you, Terry, and thank you all for your questions. I second Terry's motion for your comments, your thoughts. I really appreciate that. The forum is a very special place. Before we go further, let me just say we have more sessions coming up. In fact, next week is a special session for two reasons. It's about my new book, Peak Higher Education. That's one reason it's special. But the other reason is I'm going to be the guest. We're going to have several people from the forum community actually be the hosts and asking me questions. I'll send out a link about that, of course, early next week. I'm looking forward to that. If you'd like to learn more about our sessions, right now scheduled out through April of next year, please go to the forum website, forum.futureofereducation.us. And thank you all for being with us. I hope if you're in a cold and wet environment, I hope you stay warm and dry. I hope everyone else is safe and sound. And thank you all for being with us. We'll see you next time online. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye
Thanks,
bye.
Brian. This was fun as always. Great questions.
Thank you.